Do you ever get that message from someone who disappeared weeks or months ago and suddenly, out of nowhere, they just pop back up? Hey, how have you been? And you're sitting there staring at your phone thinking, really? Now you care? But let's pause for a moment, because while you're on the receiving end of that message, they were probably stuck in a mental tug-of-war long before they hit send. Avoidants aren't heartless. They're not emotionless, but they are conflicted. When they pull away, it's not because they don't feel something, it's because they do. That's the part most people don't see. Emotional connection triggers something in them. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing their independence, fear of being overwhelmed. So what happens? They retreat, they ghost, they vanish, and you're left with confusion. But here's the twist. When they reach out again, it's not always as casual as it seems. Behind that, hey, have you been, is usually a cocktail of thoughts. They miss the connection, but they fear the closeness. They want reassurance, but resist appearing needy. They reach out, not always because they're ready, but because the silence is louder than their fear for a moment. Now here's the hard truth. Just because they reach out doesn't mean they've changed. Sometimes it's comfort seeking. Sometimes it's genuine regret. But if their patterns haven't evolved, you'll end up reliving the same story, only with a little more wear on your heart. So when they come back, ask yourself, have they grown, or are they just lonely? Because a message from the past doesn't mean there's a future. Avoidants are often misunderstood. When they pull away from someone they care about, it's easy to assume they've stopped feeling or simply don't care. But what most people don't see is the internal storm that brews inside them during the silence. Reaching out again after days, weeks, or even months of distance is rarely a simple or casual act. It's often preceded by an exhausting internal tug-of-war between desire and fear. On the one hand, they miss the connection, the warmth, the familiarity of the person they distance themselves from. On the other hand, the moment that connection begins to feel emotionally risky or too close for comfort, their survival instincts kick in. Closeness feels threatening, not because the other person is dangerous, but because intimacy means being seen, means being vulnerable. When they finally send that message, it's not coming from a place of confidence or clarity. It often comes from a temporary emotional window where their longing becomes stronger than their fear. It could be a quiet evening when memories surface, or a moment of reflection where they realize the absence of connection is more painful than the discomfort of vulnerability. They often overthink how they'll be received. Will you ignore them? Be angry? Have you already moved on? These fears swirl beneath even the simplest of messages, so that, hey, how have you been, isn't a throwaway line. It's a cautious toe dipped back into the water, testing whether it's safe to return. But just because they're reaching out doesn't mean they've resolved the inner conflict that caused them to pull away in the first place. In that moment, what drives their action is not certainty, but a fleeting desire to feel close before fear creeps back in. When an avoidant reaches out, their message is almost never as simple as it appears. On the surface, it might just be a hey or a casual check-in, something that seems light and harmless. But beneath that small gesture is often a tangled web of emotion and uncertainty. Avoidants are not emotionally empty. They are emotionally they don't express everything they feel directly, which is why their communication often seems vague or understated. But what they're actually doing is sending out a signal in the safest way they know how, hoping to gauge whether the door is still open without risking full exposure. Their message often masks an inner dialogue full of questions. They might be wondering if you're still hurt, if you've moved on, or if you'll even respond. There's also a calculation happening. How can they reconnect without giving away too much control or appearing too vulnerable? So instead of directly saying, I miss you, they ask how you are. Instead of admitting they regret pulling away, they send a meme or mention something random that reminded them of you. It's not random, it's intentional. It's their way of re-entering your space without setting off alarms. These small messages are tests, not because they want to manipulate, but because they're trying to protect themselves from rejection or intense emotional confrontation. Even when they want closeness, they fear the cost of it. So they test the waters with minimal effort, hoping for maximum clarity. It can feel confusing, even infuriating for the person on the receiving end. But understanding that these messages carry weight can help you respond from a place of awareness rather than reaction. Every word they type is filtered through a need for safety, and every pause before hitting send is filled with questions they won't say out loud. When someone avoidant reaches out after a long silence, it's tempting to believe it means something significant has changed. After all, it takes effort to come back. It feels hopeful, maybe even redemptive, like they've reflected, grown, and are now ready for something deeper. But that's not always the case. Often, the return isn't a result of real change. It's driven by discomfort. The absence of connection starts to feel heavier than the fear of closeness. In that moment, the avoidant feels lonely, nostalgic, maybe even regretful, but not necessarily transformed. They might miss your presence, your comfort, or the familiarity of your energy, but that's very different from being ready to show up consistently and emotionally available. The problem is that loneliness and growth can look very similar on the surface. Both might lead to the same text. Both might bring a sudden wave of vulnerability. But only one comes with lasting behavior change. If someone hasn't truly worked through their avoidant patterns, they're likely to fall right back into them once the initial emotion fades. The cycle continues. Connection triggers discomfort. Discomfort leads to withdrawal, and withdrawal creates distance. Then when the distance becomes unbearable, they circle back again without having actually resolved the issue at its core. This is why it's so important not to confuse reaching out with readiness. Just because they miss you doesn't mean they're equipped to love you the way you need. They might genuinely feel sorry for the way they disappeared. They might even believe they're ready, but belief and behavior aren't always aligned. If nothing has changed in their mindset, communication style, or emotional capacity, the relationship will likely repeat the same pattern. Real change isn't about words. It's about consistent, conscious action over time, especially when fear returns. When someone who previously pulled away reaches out again, it's natural to feel a mix of hope and hesitation. Part of you may still want connection, while another part remembers the pain of their distance. This is why it's crucial to look beyond the message itself and ask what's driving their return. Are they coming back because they've truly reflected, learned something, and are ready to show up differently? Or are they simply uncomfortable sitting with their loneliness, looking to soothe that discomfort with something familiar? Avoidants often return when the silence becomes too loud. They start to feel the weight of disconnection and crave the emotional safety you once gave them. But craving connection is not the same as committing to it. Their reach out may be motivated more by a desire to ease their own emotional tension than by a genuine willingness to build something real. In other words, it's about relief, not resolution. That's why it's important to stay grounded and not mistake emotional urgency for emotional maturity. One way to tell the difference is to watch what they do after the initial message. Do they initiate deeper conversations? Are they willing to take responsibility for their behavior? Are they consistent even when things get emotionally uncomfortable again? If not, chances are this is more about them seeking comfort than offering change. People who want to grow lean in. They don't just dip in and out. And people who are ready to connect don't avoid the hard conversations. They welcome them because they know that's where real intimacy is built. So before getting pulled back in, Take a step back, observe, don't just absorb. Listen to what's said, but more importantly, pay attention to what's shown. Reconnection should come with clarity, not confusion. So what does it all mean when an avoidant reaches out again? It means they're human, complex, conflicted, and often fighting battles you'll never see. But your job isn't to decode every message or carry the weight of their emotional journey. Your job is to protect your peace, honor your needs, and recognize the difference between someone who wants you and someone who's just missing the comfort of you. Connection without accountability leads to cycles, not growth. You deserve someone who doesn't just reach out when it's convenient, but shows up when it counts. Consistently, clearly, and without fear as an excuse. So if that message comes in, take a breath before responding. Ask yourself, is this love or is this longing? Is this change or is this comfort seeking? Because your future deserves more than recycled confusion. Thank you so much for giving your time, your presence, and your heart to this space. I appreciate you listening, not just for them, but for you. If this helped bring clarity or even just made you feel understood, then it did its job.